can't there be a million founders in India? Why can't there be a million startups? I'd had 3 good success stories. Facebook, where I was a very early engineer. The Dropbox, which kind of came in when they acquired my company. And then on the board of Flipkart. About 2017, I was trying to figure out what to do next. I realized that I cannot be the only one who is kind of in between things. People needed some time to go explore.
Getting a bunch of builders together and giving them a community. How does funding come in the picture?
Early days of SPC, you create an environment where the focus is not on what is the first idea that somebody will give me money for, as opposed to what is like the biggest idea that I can think of. Chances are they'll start more ambitious companies. So when we saw that happening consistently, we then started the fund.
And how did the timing of SPC India work for you?
Over the next 5-7 years, we'll have real high quality talent, founders who've gone through the rodeo once, wanting to come back and build something far more ambitious. Plus young people who've seen all of this happen. And suddenly you have a belief in the kind of problems they want to go after.
The amount of talent in India is incredible. And then Lakani said recently, why can't there be a million founders in India? Why can't there be a million startups?
Hi, this is Siddharth Aluwalia, your host at Neon Show and managing partner at Neon Fund, a fund that invests in the best of enterprise AI companies between US-India corridor like Atomic Works, Poddraft, CloudSec. Today, I have with me Aditya and Prateek from South Park Commons. Welcome, Aditya and Prateek. So glad to have you today.
Excited to be here.
So it's a pleasure to be here.
I think South Park Commons is not traditionally the VC fund, as it's called, right? Where the fund focuses on 0 to 100 journey. You are from -1 to 1. What are the -1 state? I would love to start there.
When the idea behind -1 Siddhant, kind of came about when I was leaving Dropbox. And, prior to, Dropbox had just IPO'd, but I was in a very lucky position where I'd had 3 good success stories, right? I'd had Facebook, where I was a very early engineer. The Dropbox, which kind of came in when they acquired my company. I was CTO there. And then I'd also been involved on the board of Flipkart for a good 4 or 5 years. And so about 2017, when I was trying to all of these, Dropbox is IPO'd, Flipkart had just entered a transaction with Walmart. I was trying to figure out what to do next with my life. And in that time period, it was very interesting because I had a lot of the options. I was very lucky. I had a lot of great options that I could pursue, right? I could go start a company, fundraising would be easy. I could go join as a senior executive at kind of a fast growing company, at a number of offers. And then I also had the chance to go join as a partner in a bunch of blue chip funds, right? And what I found myself realizing is that all of these were the paths. They were amazing, but they were well-known paths. Like people who have done what I have done, these are the paths that kind of the world in Silicon Valley kind of gives me. And I found myself thinking, what about the paths that are not quite as common? Like, what do I not know? How do I kind of understand where the opportunity, because, it's interesting because as entrepreneurs, you also always want to find the places where not a lot of people are looking. You don't want to go and do the same thing, right? So in that vein, what I realized is that instead of jumping in to do the next thing, I wanted to take some time to go and explore. Let me go find out what is happening at the frontier of technology. What are the people building in garages? What are the crazy things happening in the research labs, in the frontier kind of smaller startups? So what I realized, and so that was my first thinking, which is I just want to go explore. And my second aha moment came when I realized that I cannot be the only one who is kind of in between things, right? Because if you look at our careers today, they're quite different than, my father's career. Like Silicon Valley, even here in Bangalore, a lot of our career is we take, whatever, 2, 3, 4 years, we go for a mission. And then after that, we go figure out what to do next, right? So I realized that in between these missions, people needed some time to go explore. So the early days of -1 was basically, let's go find 10 people who are all in this in-between journey. So I went and I found, somebody who had just sold kind of their company to Cisco. I found one of the very early employees of Stripe. I found a couple of people who had just gotten their PhD from Stanford and were now figuring out, they spent 7 years getting their PhD and they were now figuring out what to do. And we basically set up a learning club. That's what we called ourselves. There was no South Park Commons. There was no -1 even kind of terminology. And this learning club would do 3 things every week. The first thing that we would do, and this, a lot of this still inspires SPC today, right? The first thing that we would do is that every week You had to build something and demo it to everyone else. And I start with this because it is very important that for us, we are a community of builders, right? And this is a little bit different than being a community of just learning for the sake of learning. For us, you learn so you can build. So every week you have to build something with velocity, with speed to demo to everyone. That was the first thing we did. The second thing that we did is that we would pick a topic that was interesting and we would all kind of like learn about it together. So we would pick, say, this is kind of amazing, but in 2017, we would pick something like deep learning, right? We would pick SMR, small modular nuclear reactors. We would pick water technology. We would pick how do you do hacking? How do you essentially like engineer cells using CRISPR, right? And so we would basically pick a topic, and then what we would do is that everybody had to read a paper or a journal and then come and educate everyone else. And then lastly, once a week, we would invite somebody really interesting in our network who was doing frontier things and ask them to come speak to us. So, in the early days, someone like, like a Vitalik Buterin, who was just building the Ether network, who obviously became Ethereum. Someone like a Jennifer Doudna, who was doing groundbreaking work on CRISPR. So they would come to a small kind of setup and just speak to us, right? So from these, like when I think about -1 and what we are today, a lot of these elements remain, right? A focus on essentially like frontier kind of like exploration, a focus on essentially meeting and talking to like really interesting kind of people to kind of jog your creativity, and lastly, a focus on building, right? So these are the three North Stars when I think about our community today, whether it's in SF, in Bangalore, or in New York. This is what we organize ourselves around. And if a focus not immediately on building companies, but a focus on exploration to then kind of build companies after that.
And how does this, the funding come in the picture? So it sounds very noble, like getting bunch of builders together, and giving them tools, access, and a community.
Sure. When people are exploring together, and I think there's a bit of mythology from the valley as well, that as the community started coming together, people who were, this is not a learning community only. So there is a very clear exploration on what do I want to do next. And depending on who you are, the kind of superpowers you have, the kind of lived experiences you have, and what you're currently curious about, you will progress on a certain vector, which might be around an opportunity that you're excited about. It might be a problem statement. It might be a customer problem, or it might just be building something interesting and figuring out where it will go. And in that context, as people spend time in the community, as a staff, we also have a lot of surface area with them, and we know what they're building, what is the kind of ambition, creativity, generativeness, and the urgency with which they're exploring. And as they come to their own personal conviction that this is what I want to be building for the next 5, 7, 10 years of my life, as if their interest and curiosity is overlaps with ours, we are happy to come in. And typically, what we do is we commit $1 million to a team at the pre-seed stage. So 400K at the pre-seed stage and at least 600K at the seed. We also have a seed motion because what we've realized is that we are, by way of quality of talent, we've been able to attract a really great talent who is wanting to build something extremely ambitious. And some of them will possibly raise larger rounds. And there we also come in with seed rounds.
Yeah, it's interesting. I want to perhaps add on to Prateek's point at the end there about building something ambitious. Because in the early days of SPC, you're right. There was no fun. It was all, me being noble, right? Me and Ruchi being noble. But the motion was really, Siddhant, that ultimately we moved out of our living room. We got a building in San Francisco in the South Park area, hence we're named South Park Commons. And in the early days, it was very hard to get into SPC. But as people got in and, after some time they would start companies, I would write an angel check and then I would introduce them to people in my network. We did that for 1 year. And then we found something quite interesting. We found that the quality of the companies coming out of SPC was just consistently a lot higher. And now quality is obviously like a somewhat, ambiguous term that has many different dimensions to it. And I can get into what we look for. But the one quality that we found is that people were building more ambitious ideas. They with more depth, right? And in some ways, this isn't surprising right? Like if you kind of give people some time to really figure out like what are the interesting ideas, and you create an environment where the focus is not on what is the first idea that somebody will give me money for, as opposed to what is like the biggest idea that I can think of, the chances are they'll start more ambitious companies, right? So when we saw that happening, I saw this happening consistently, which is when we then started the fund. So the fund was started about 18 months after we started the community. And the goal of the fund now is that as members come and they spend time with us, we will fund the ambitious ideas that they come up with.
And when you, let's say, an entrepreneur or a to-be entrepreneur signs up with SPC, there is no commitment that they have to pursue an idea. It's a space, right, that you give them based on selection.
Correct. Yeah. This is actually a really good point. One of the things that I find, if I'm being very honest, is that not everybody should start a company.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that our environment, when somebody comes in to join the community, is that you should start a company if you're willing to go through 20 years of pain. Right. But sometimes, honestly, it's like better to go join a company that's like actually taking off. So a number of our companies end up finding their early kind of like co-founders or founding team members or early engineers through the community itself. And I'm very proud also that for instance in San Francisco, we have had people from SPC go on to take on political office. So like one of the San Francisco board of supervisors actually came through SPC. A number of the leading labs of AI, they had the first few people go and join them through SPC. We've had people write books. We've had people become content producers, and we welcome that. Right? It's actually great, because a lot of the times when people come to us, we say that your goal in coming to SPC is to find your life's work. That doesn't have to be a company. It very well might, because that's a vehicle through which a lot of us express ourselves, but it doesn't need to be.
And in a year, let's say, how many people join and how many end up starting a community or starting a company through SPC?
Let me, I think the answer is different for different geographies, right? So since we are here in Bangalore, I'll talk about Bangalore, right? Because in SF, the density and the number of people wanting to start up might be fundamentally different. So if you look at, and I'll just qualify, I think that the question that you asked was very interesting. The previous question is that, we think of this as it's a learning community, but it's also a zone of excellence. So the bar on talent is very, very high. The selection rate for the community is less than 1%, right? So by way of number of applications that come in and the number of people who actually get an access to the community, right? So the access to the community is either by invite or by application. And the reason why I said zone of excellence is, on one hand, we'll have people who've been there, done that. We'll have seasoned founders. We'll have seasoned execs from companies which have driven the success of a lot of companies that we see out there today. We see young and crack builders who are extremely talented, gifted, fearless. And we also have people who have achieved excellence in some field, right? For example, one of our members is actually Somdev Devvarman, who's India's top-ranked ATP tennis player ever, right? And he's exploring something in the future of sports with his co-founder, right? So that's one example, right? We have a bunch of PhDs exploring something. So the idea is that excellence and ambition go hand in hand, and can we have people getting inspired from each other? So that's, so I wanted to prefix that and then come on to the number of people, right? So in the last 15 odd months, we've close to about 70 members who come into the community. A typical duration of membership for us is about 6 months. So people come in and we do, people come in, they stay on for give or take 6 months. For us, a success metric at the end of that membership is that whoever the person is should be at a point of conviction.
Correct.
And the conviction might be, I want to start a company. It might be, I want to join somebody else on their mission. And you know what, as founders and builders, we've all gone through hard phases in life where you actually need to rest and recover. And the conviction might be that I need more time to rest and recover. And all three of them are good outcomes from our perspective. Right? Of course, if you're starting a company,
right,
we'd like to have a look.
Yeah, one of the things, it's interesting. This is a good problem to have. We have a lot more demand for what we provide than unfortunately we can serve, right? We strongly believe that, it's interesting to think of as like, hey, SPC, like we have, a great bunch of investors and so on. And yes, we're awesome, but we really think that our North Star is high talent density. The best ideas come when you're able to engage in like deep, high bandwidth conversations with the other members. So our focus on talent density is so that like anybody at SPC can talk to someone else at SPC and leave feeling like, wow, I learned something. They stretched my idea, or they helped me validate or invalidate. And our strong belief is that that happens in often like kind of like intimate environments, right? So kind of some of what we think a lot about is that we want to serve more people. Like to Prateek's point, I'm very proud of like the 1% acceptance rate. But I know that there are some people in there that like, like would be great for us, but we just don't have capacity for. But at the same time, we are very, very we're very attuned that like our community should feel like intimate, like people should know each other. They should be like, if you're here, you should know everyone else who's kind of in the community. So we think a lot about that.
And I think the extension of that is the way in which staff also ends up interacting with the community, because every person is different, and the assistance or the support that they might be looking for might also be very different depending on their own circumstances, right? And high quality bespoke support cannot be provided at scale.
Completely agreed.
So
yeah, I mean, and I think we can share the numbers, right? In the last 1 year, we've been it's been amazing to see, like we've had roughly about 70 community members, 70 to 80 community members join us in SPC Bangalore. I would not have expected this. Honestly, when Prateek and I were joking about this, when we first kind of started last October, maybe, I was telling him, Prateek, get to 20 members, man. And so like, it's been amazing to kind of see the progress, but also like I would say the Bangalore kind of ecosystem's desire to be part of kind of SPC. And we've had roughly 15, 20 companies come out of it, which we're very, very excited to be partnering with. I've met most of our companies on this trip, and this is remarkable to see the range of things they're building and kind of what they're excited about. Yeah,
100%. I think the 20 to 70 kind of divergence, is also very interesting, because, and we often joke here that we think of ourselves also as a startup,
100%,
right? And we behave and smell like one. You've seen The Office, right? So we actually believe that we are at the PMF stage, right? And when a company is PMFing, it's really hard. You want to make sure that your quote unquote customers are having a great
100%.
experience. As a staff, you are struggling to make sure that everything is kind of
You're always stressed.
You're always stressed, right? And you're like, oh, you know what am I? I know this is a friendly podcast, so what am I falling short on?
Yeah,
Right?
100%.
Yeah.
I mean, we're doing so many things we can be doing better. Right?
Yes, 100%.
Like, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I've been in technology now for about 21 years, and about 14 of them was spent kind of building Facebook, my own startup, then Dropbox, and then 7 as kind of a investor. I do investing, but I don't think of ourselves as an investment firm. We are a small, nimble organization that is trying very hard to kind of serve our founders in what is a pretty intense period in their journey. And we want, we are constantly evolving. I think this is the most fun part of what we are building, which is we are constantly thinking about what does the ecosystem need, like what is same and what is different about the AI world. And I'm sure you see it a lot, right? There's a lot of things that are similar, but there's lots of things that's different, right? Like, the ecosystem I always find it very odd that we want to invest in like a rapidly shifting ecosystem where we expect founders to be at the frontier, but we want to run our VC firms as kind of being like these old, almost like, set in constant stone kind of organizations. I'm just like, VC firms need to be like evolving even faster, right? To kind of like keep up with our founders. Yeah.
And, how has AI been changing the way that you invest, first of all?
Sure.
And the second is the companies that are getting built, because earlier a lot of focus would have been, on building products. Now building products has become, I would say, the easiest part. The harder is what to build, how to serve.
There's so many layers to that answer, right? So I will start with some, and maybe Prateek can go into it. Maybe I'll talk a little bit about the domains that AI is affecting, right? And how it kind of affects kind of like the investing landscape. The first one I think is very, very positive, which is that when you have a platform shift of the magnitude of AI, right? I think what it does is that it gives entrepreneurs a tremendous amount of like energy and enthusiasm to tackle sectors that they might not even have thought, right? Today, like honestly, all of us have used Google for the last 20 years happily, right? It's the world's best search engine, and I use it like 100 times a day, right? And nobody kind of thought that like, hey, we haven't really seen anybody try to take on like build a modern search engine forever. Today they are like 3, right? You can use ChatGPT, you can use Perplexity, you can use a bunch more like verticalized search engines. So I think that's just one example. I can point to healthcare. I can talk to more consumer apps. Like, look at the insane amount of innovation in consumer hardware, in kind of robotics hardware. These are all areas that 5 years ago nobody was tackling. And the reason why we are kind of seeing it happen is because AI is providing just immense, not just technological capability, but I would say founder kind of like founder vision, right? And I think so. This is why, like, in one perspective, it's an amazing time to be an investor because it's leading to this explosion of creativity and possibility. That's the first thing I'll point out, that AI is dramatically expanding the scope of what we are looking at. The second one I'll say is that, often in the early stages, a startup doesn't work for a long time, right? Like, it's just kind of up and down, up and down. Like, you see some kind of like glimmers of something working and then kind of not working, right? And so it takes a long time for something to work. But then when it works, it starts kind of taking off, right? It often takes off quicker than you would think. What we are seeing is that in AI, that whole cycle is accelerated. So in that first part, which is kind of like when you're kind of like groping around to find product market fit, I find that pathfinding process for startups today is a lot faster. And this is because of what you said, because like you can build a lot quicker. You build something, you try to position it, you go talk to some customers, they don't like it, you build the next thing. Instead of taking 2 months to build it, you build it in a week, right? It's all possible. And so you find that pathfinding part is actually a lot faster. And then the second one, which is when it starts working, it works a lot faster. Kind of like the rate of, I would say, when our companies start working, they just go through an immense amount of growth, which is very interesting from an investment perspective. Like, if you think about the way that a lot of traditional Series A investing has worked, it assumes that people will stick around the Series A stage for like a while. And I think today, startups don't stick around for a while, right? Like, you go from being kind of like seed stage or like, a little bit after seed to Series B quite quickly. So I think that a lot of the investment landscape is kind of shifting in response to AI being an accelerant. I can get into how AI is affecting us internally, but Prateek, I don't know if you have anything to add there as well.
I think I'll just add like one point to this, which is that across the board, when you look at historically, people look at what is getting disrupted, what is getting solved at a faster, better way. I think we are in that at that point in where things are changing so fast that a bunch of very interesting new experiences are getting created, which were thought almost not possible in let's say a few years back when we would have possibly discussed them. But today, literally things which are boring and hard, whether you look at the way governments interact with people, whether it's consumer AI experiences, a lot of people had given up that, hey, distribution is all with larger guys. What are the new experiences going to come out? And suddenly you see an explosion of new form factors coming out. Defense and space tech, you would have thought that the amount of cost and the effort that it takes, it's almost going to be hard for smaller people to do something interesting. But now a lot of interesting things are possible just because of the rate at which things are getting accelerated, and the frontier of possibility itself is getting moved.
And you were saying how has AI impacted you internally?
All across the board, right? Like, if you kind of think about, you're also an investor, so hopefully this will resonate. But if you kind of break down the act of investing, right? Like, if you break it down into like, okay, I need to go find people, amazing people at the top of the funnel, right? Then from those set of people, I need to go find people who are resonant with our kind of investment theses and our investment areas, to then kind of like, how do I then support them, right? Like, when they're actually a portfolio company or they're in the community, how do we support them with early go-to-market introductions to engineers, like post kind of like fundraising support, right? And like and then with marketing as well, obviously, right? So all of those areas, we kind of decided about 18 months ago that much like we want to invest in AI companies, and all our companies today are able to get a lot done with fewer people, we need to be as AI forward as all of our companies. So in each of those areas, we're actually investing quite a large amount of, I would say, tooling, functionality, process, like also like AI just like pushing each other to kind of be like, why are you doing this manually? Like, have you thought about using an LLM? There's a great example, right? Like, one of the, we wake up every morning to kind of like a long list of like all our interactions that our, kind of our staff members have had, so that, just to keep each other up to date so we can help them. Now, like, AI summarizes all of that and kind of is able to call out like who can potentially help who. So it's very interesting. I think that our productivity in terms of a team has gone up like massively. I also want to give a special shout out to actually our technology team. For kind of our global technology team is actually based out of SPC here in Bangalore.
Okay.
And they've done a phenomenal job of like kind of like helping us scale. So it's been amazing to kind of see how much we are investing. And honestly, it's fun for me. I've probably written more code this year than I have in a while. But a lot of it, Siddharth, I think it's a mindset shift, right? Like, I think it is a mindset shift to kind of being like technology. As investors, like, we're not used to thinking about like kind of like building technology or building tooling, right? But a lot of our investors have operating backgrounds, they're all technical. So a lot of it is like actually changing your mindset, which is I'm doing things like this. How can I automate? How can I augment? How can I kind of like simplify, streamline all of what I'm doing so that it allows me to spend time doing the things that cannot be augmented via AI? And there's a lot of that also, right? But you have to change that mindset. And so all of us are pushing very hard.
Yeah, I'll share one example from our own experience. So we recently invested in third-time founders who have exited both their previous companies to two public companies in the past.
Yeah.
And we asked them, after the investment, that why did you choose Neon over the tier one VCs? Because in your past two startups, you had tier ones on your
You're a tier
capital.
one. Give yourself credit.
And they said that the large $500 million funds that had invested in their past companies, the partners come from a preacher mindset that, hey, this is how things should be done, this is how SaaS should be built.
Yeah.
And the thing that AI world, everything is rewritten. We want somebody to work with us to figure out, because we are figuring it out, right? And we don't want answers.
This is so good. I mean, this is actually a big part. I mean, Prateek alluded to this earlier, but I believe a lot that organizations run on all the small signals that you send, not kind of like the high level values. And then the values are important. Values and principles are very important, but it is almost like the implicit signals that the environment and the other people send. Why is our office? I mean, for those of us watching, our offices are not fancy. We're the least fancy VC office you'll go to. This is actually the case here. Our San Francisco office is also not fancy. And why do we do that? It's because I want us as a team, but also the people that we work with, to realize we are in the same struggle as them, right? Like, it is very disorienting when you're like a seed stage founder who is struggling and thinking about cash flow, to go into like a very fancy office and then be like, how will this person understand my day-to-day struggle, right? You come to SPC and I'm just like, to this day, like, we expect there is no one to do it. Like, we expect people to come in and do it because that's what startups do. So much in the same way with AI, how can I tell a founder that you should be so AI forward if we are not doing it, right? Like, it's actually insane to me. So like, it's not easy to implement AI, right? Like, it's easy to talk about it, but when you get down to it, how do you make it truly effective? Like, the way to do it is that you actually do it yourself. So you have a visceral understanding. So I could not agree more. And today with AI, nobody actually knows the answers. Nobody has like all the recipes set. Nobody has all of the templates set. So the right mental model is you have to go out there and start trying things. And then you are also in the learning process along with your founders.
I think on that point, I'll just like to add, an important part of being an investor today, I believe, is being curious about what's changing out there in the world, right? And because as founders, the only opportunity that we get is because something is changing in the world, and that opens up a door of opportunity, and that we possibly can force our way through. And that's also the reason why when we invest, we're not talking about thesis and right, this market is going to go this way. We're talking about axis of curiosity, which is something that we publish every 6 months, and we talk about what are the broad areas where we believe things are changing, and there might be some opportunity that might be coming by. And what we request for is also curiosity from our founders. When they come and share something that they are curious about, we are happy to get excited about it and then hopefully come in as investors.
Yeah, like we often say that at SPC, when a member meets another member, you should not, like, a better question, the common question is, what are you working on? What's your startup idea? And instead we say, let's reorient it to actually say, what are you curious about? What are the big open questions that you have, that you're pulling on, that you're trying to get some amount of insight that then can get translated into an idea or a company? But right now, it's more about curiosity. Like great founders have immense amounts of curiosity and depth, actually.
In SPC in the US has and in the Bay Area especially has existed for the last 7 years, right? What are some of the known companies that have come out of SPC? If you can share some of those journeys.
Yeah, absolutely. One of our companies, thinking back to like Fund One, this was, some of our earliest companies that, very proud of are like great companies, Base 10. So this is kind of one of the leading kind of like AI inference companies. They've really kind of built out like a great product that is allowing enterprises to really kind of like deploy a variety of kind of models within kind of like their applications. And you've seen phenomenal growth. They recently kind of raised around valuing them at like multi-billions of dollars, like I think a $2 billion valuation that I think has been announced publicly. Another one of our great companies is Render. So this is kind of building a modern kind of like essentially platform as a service kind of app. So basically, instead of building on bare metal, kind of like on the cloud services, you can use Render to manage kind of your compute and your databases and so on. Also doing phenomenally well. Another one of our early companies is Pilot. So this was started by Wasim, Jessica, and Jeff, and they're basically building out. They started doing this a while ago, but like, what would AI-enabled bookkeeping look like, right? Like from scratch. We also have in our portfolio Gamma, which is one of a very fast-growing company. Which is, imagine if all slides were built using AI. Some other companies that are interesting is that we have one of the world's leading video foundation model companies, Luma AI, started by Amit Jain. Profound is a great example. Profound is a company that is basically everybody, frankly, like most modern ways of searching are through LLMs, right? So now the question is, how is an LLM how are you showing up in an LLM query, right? Like if you're Nike, if you're one of the big brands, like you really care about what does ChatGPT, what does, kind of Claude, what does, Perplexity say about you? So what is the form of like modern AEO, answer engine optimization, and they're doing phenomenally well, right? They've kind of gotten funding. After us, it was a combination of Khosla, then Kleiner, and then Sequoia did the most recent round, right? So what I find interesting, and then we also have had probably like 4 foundation model companies come out of like essentially SPC, 4 or 5 actually, kind of doing everything from general purpose kind of like open source models to more specific models around essentially everything from computer aided engineering to essentially like emotion based kind of like models. So we have a lot of, I would say, AI kind of, I would say, lineage within SPC. But again, like what's interesting is that when we funded a lot of these companies, or when these people joined South Park Commons, they were figuring out what to do. They had the core kernel of talent and ambition, which is what we look for. But it took them like, 3-6 months to figure out like the exact manifestation of that ambition. Yeah.
And how did the timing of SPC India work for you? Why not earlier or later?
Interesting. Okay. I've said this a few times in some other audience, but happy to. I think from our perspective, right, one of the things that most founders want is the right timing, right? And often it's serendipity. But maybe Aditya can talk about the origin story a little more.
Sure.
But yeah, maybe why don't you share that? Then I can get into a little
it's interesting. It's a good question. I would say that there's been a lot of bottoms up demand for SPC in a number of different global locations. Before we started SPC here in Bangalore, probably the places where people were really kind of asking for it would be London, would be Paris, would be Bangalore, a little bit in Southeast Asia, the Gulf as well. And we were obviously humbled by the demand, but we are very, I would say, conscious of quality. For us, it's very important that every member at SPC had a great experience, and we try our best to ensure that, right? So I would say that obviously being from India, I'd always wanted to do something in Bangalore, but it was also just like hard to imagine doing it at the quality level that we wanted without having a deep understanding of essentially the local, I would say, the Bangalore ecosystem. Because, I don't want to do things at 70% quality level. I want to do them at like, if you're going to do something, I want to stand behind it with 100% of our brand and quality. So I was kind of in that zone of like, yeah, we have opportunity, but I don't know how to pull this off in a way that I would be happy with the result. I actually credit Binny Bansal for giving me a big push. So this must have been actually about like 18 months ago, probably like February, March of 2024, when he was visiting me in San Francisco. He came over for lunch and he was like, why aren't you doing this? And I said, Benny, listen, I want to, but I'm just worried about the quality. And I don't know if I know enough people on the ground who will actually help me. So to Benny's credit, he gave me a lot of essentially confidence. He's like, hey, okay, I think your concerns are real, but I will actually help you find the early team. I will help you with a lot of the operations, the logistics, and you have me and my team's support in doing that. And that kind of gave me, I would say, like the confidence that like, okay, you know what? Let's give it a shot. Like I don't know what I don't know, but let's give it a shot. So from that initial, I would say, from that initial kind of like burst of, I would say, possibility, kind of really came about 1 year ago, which I would say that the big turning point for us here was hiring Prateek, right? Where I think that like having somebody with his, I'll give you some compliments, okay?
Happy to take them.
Yeah. With some rare combination of being technical, being an operator. He's obviously like operated at like, large scale, being a founder, and kind of like, I would say, loving the startup mindset. This is a rare combination to have. Most of the times people can satisfy one or two of those. But a lot of our, like I would say Ruchi and I have the same background, right? As Prateek, in terms of starting companies, scaling companies, investing, loving technology, comfortable with the ambiguity of early stage companies. So once Prateek came on board, I think is when we really hit the races, went off the races. But Prateek can tell you a little bit more kind of about the early days.
Yeah, absolutely. When we started jamming early on, I did the regular bottoms up thing as a builder, right? So in this space, broadly, we exist, as I say internally, also we exist in the service of founders trying to go after really ambitious problems. So then you want to figure out whether there are so many interesting people who might be wanting to jam and do open-ended exploration, because India as a culture is a culture where smart people are supposed to have answers and not questions. They are supposed to have clarity, not confusion. But the reality of a founder's life is that early days, you have like a lot of questions and you have a lot of confusion. And at times, a little bit of trepidation about, what, am I the best position right now at this stage in my life to be solving this or not? And all of us, because we've been operators and founders earlier, we understand that. It's a visceral understanding. It's difficult to put in words, but you understand because you've gone through that. And as I was looking through this, right, I realized that over the next 5-7 years, we'll have real high quality talent, founders who've gone through the rodeo once, wanting to come back and build something far more ambitious this time, seasoned operators who have built startups which have been successful, have tasted success. And often success teaches you far more than failures. Failures have high anecdotal value, but success teaches you like no one else.
So true.
Yeah, and so many people who've seen success and tasted success, and so many people who've seen financial outcomes that de-link their short-term professional adventures from their personal financial needs or whatever aspirations that they might have. With that, and plus young people who've seen all of this happen, and suddenly you have like belief in terms of the way they want to, or the kind of problems they want to go after,
Absolutely.
and the urgency with which they want to go after, right? So when we looked at numbers, and I still remember doing like a basic sales navigator on LinkedIn, I said, oh, you know what? Possibly over the next 5-7 years, there are going to be 2,000 to 5,000 people.
Yeah.
And maybe if we get like a small percentage of that, right? Hopefully we'll dominate that. But maybe then it's not too bad. So I said, yeah, of course, this is the time to build. And look, it was a hypothesis. And once we get in and we started building this out, suddenly we realized that there's so many high quality builders who wanted this space. And slowly and as he says, we hit the races, and it's been a fun ride.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think one thing I'll kind of highlight from what Prateek said, right, which is that I think different people have different points of view on this. So this might be a little controversial, but I'm going to go for it. Okay. I think there's one belief that people think that, listen, the number of great entrepreneurs is ultimately small. Okay. And like, you can't really like make more of them. Like, there are only so few Elon Musks out there. And, like the VC industry's job is to go, I would say, find like the 10 or so people who are going to change the world. There's probably some kernel of truth to it. But I tend to fall more that I actually think there's a ton more talent and ambition out there that we have not unearthed, right? And because entrepreneurship is also about exposure. It's also about making people believe that like entrepreneurship is not something that someone else does. You can do it. You can just do things, right? So I think that the biggest thing, I'm very proud of a number of different things that we have done here in Bangalore. But the two things that I'm like, man, this is awesome. Is that number one, people here buy kind of our core, I would say, philosophy that come and explore. It is okay to admit you don't know what you're working on. That takes a certain amount of courage. And I think I've heard it from all our members, like, yeah, like we're in the -1 stage. Like that's a great stage to kind of go and figure out what there is to work on. And number two, the amount of talent in India is incredible, right? Like I'm interviewing, Nandan is coming to us, Nandan Nilekani is coming to SPC today, and I was reading up a bunch about what he has said recently, and he's like, why can't there be 1 million founders in India? Why can't there be 1 million startups, right? And I think that's a really good provocative question. Now, like why not? Like what is the true limit to kind of starting a company? And I'm just optimistic that we can play a part in that. Our goal is to kind of enable like every great entrepreneur out there to go through that exploration journey and to figure out something awesome to build, because I think that's how society moves forward.
And the other thing is that, how do you find the talent density in India versus Bay Area? Because obviously, like you could have been stuck to Bay Area, not open another headache of traveling to India 4 times in a year, right? Why do it, right? Because the talent density first and the quality of the talent. Does the talent here match of the best builders in Bay Area? And you can be honest about it, right? Because our audience would love to know how to improve that.
Yeah, it's a good question. I tend to maybe this is something that I need to reflect on. I tend to not live my life as a series of like, hey, is this the absolute best thing I can do? So like I think it's quite a hard question to answer, right? Like to run the counterfactual of like, hey, is this like the absolute, like I don't know, but I know that coming to India, what I am convinced about is that there is sufficient technical depth and sufficient, I would say, ceiling of ambition, right? I am confident about those two things. Like, it's incredible, man. Like, on Saturday, we had an event here called basically oriented towards younger builders, and we had like 300 people show up, right? And yeah, a lot of them were pitching ideas that were like, I'm not 100% sure about, but there were some ideas in there. I'm like, this is incredible. This person is building like, automated kind of like defense against like essentially like, drones, to kind of building out like a real-time sequencing thing for like allowing kind of like, real-time detection of like certain pathologies. And I was just thinking there, I'm like, who knows like what will work, but the ambition is there, right? As a VC, my job is to make sure that at least at South Park Commons, like what makes me excited to be in India, it's not a headache to be here, well, it's a long flight, but I love being here. Is really like that level of talent and the kind of like the ceiling of ambition. I'm confident that it is in India. Now, in terms of constructive advice, like, and I tell this to all our members, like I say this every time, there are probably two things that I would kind of tell the audience, right? Number one is you like do not like, I think you don't need to have a permission of like, sorry, a culture of permission, right? Great entrepreneurs don't ask for permission, they ask for forgiveness, right? Like you just go do things, right? Like it doesn't matter. You don't need anybody's approval. You don't need somebody to kind of tell you like, yes, you can do it, right? It's much better to do it. And then you come and show people like, hey, like, do you like this or not? So I would push people that like, you don't need permission. Like great entrepreneurs don't need permission. That's the first thing. And the second one is like, and this is particularly about AI, I strongly disagree with the narrative that a bunch of people have that India can't do AI. I think that's ridiculous. I think we have seen enough examples from some of our members, some of the companies that they are starting, that India actually has absolutely the level of talent required to be able to build amazing AI companies, whether that be AI specific AI small models, that be AI kind of like verticalized kind of like experiences. I don't think that we suffer from a lack of GPUs or from a lack of capital. So I would say that just go out and do it. Like I'm seeing enough examples of people being able to do it that like I'm confident that they can. Yeah.
So I'll share one example also there. We were visiting Jaipur for a friend's wedding.
Yeah.
We met one of the founders who was running a clothing brand for 100 crores, approximately like $12 million. And he said that he has half the support team and wants to, give the other half, like 16 members in support team, taken down to 8. And the other 8 members he's finding role for in the companies because there's not a culture of firing. I said, what happened? So they started using a tool, created by 2 founders sitting in Bangalore.
Amazing.
And it completely has built autonomous customer support on
Nice.
all the channels, right?
Yeah.
And then say you should speak to this company. We eventually ended up leading the round
That's amazing.
of this
Wow.
company. And the customers are sitting places like Jaipur. So you can think of, right, India tier 2 or 3 doesn't invest in AI, proven wrong.
Absolutely.
The customers are ready. I think we are going to see an inflection wave where more and more of this is going to happen.
100%.
I mean, it's really to build upon that. I would actually, one of the amazing parts about AI is that it is actually a truly democratizing technology, right? Like, the foundation models that people can use via an API sitting in San Francisco, you can do the same thing, right? Like the same open source models you can download and you can run them, right? Like if you want to build a small model, like using a small amount of money, you can get access to the same credits that people get from honestly, like it's amazing that Amazon, Microsoft, Google give these credits. It allows people to go and start experimenting. So I think that the narrative that India can't is in like it's insane. In fact, I actually would say that India might actually be one of the leading kind of consumers and utilizers of AI API functionality in the coming years for all of the reasons that you have said. So I'm incredibly bullish.
Yeah, another thing to point out, and I'll take a few more examples. This clothing company is generating $10,000 more dollars of more revenue
Amazing.
because of this tool.
Mhm.
And yesterday I talked to somebody in HDFC in lending department, and they're saying that for a company that we are doing DD for, they're saying earlier companies were built to provide tools for underwriters. Now we are looking for an AI underwriter.
There you go.
Nice.
Yeah, we should talk about you.
Yeah, absolutely. One of our founders here, he had like a belief that the world's entire training data set and the way voice models have been built for American audiences, right? And because most of the data is online is out there, 90% of the English is American English, the cultural expression is American, but that doesn't serve the rest of the world because the way voice shows up is in real interactions, and this has a factor of so cultural factors, there's emotive factors, there's the way you enunciate and intone, right? So all of those things, they show up in here and now, and in a future where all of us are living alongside AI agents or enough form factors that we currently can't possibly even articulate and imagine, right? We will. His belief was that can we create something which is fundamentally for the rest of the world. So he started building voice foundation model, and in the true Indian spirit, they've been extremely frugal and
Amazing.
and extremely, I would say, from a technical smarts perspective, possibly right out there, right, in terms of the top X% out there, and they have trained at well, hardly any credits, and possibly the entire model runs on one GPU, right? And by the way, that's not the most interesting thing out there is that if you look at all the leaderboards, right, OpenWeight, they're number 2 out there, and doing better than literally all other models out there, and even on the global scorecard, they are in the top 20 now, right?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, to give some of the listeners some inspiration. One of the things I agree with you what you had said earlier, Siddhant, that AI makes it a lot easier to build. I don't disagree. I think that's very true. But AI is also a little unique in that relative to a lot of the technologies that we have all learned how to use, it actually requires a somewhat deeper foundation in actually like understanding the math behind it, some of kind of the linear algebra. And I think that a lot of the folks coming out of India actually have a stronger base understanding of those things. Honestly, you ask the average CS graduate in America to understand matrix, kind of like matrix math, advanced linear algebra, kind of like to understand kind of like how these actually models work, they would struggle with it, right? I actually don't think that's the case in India, right? If you are able to kind of like apply yourself. So I think we have a lot of like natural strengths that like people should kind of like feel confident about and kind of just like swagger a little bit,
I think the other shift that has happened is AI has shifted the balance or the tilt towards more towards technical builders.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah.
Like
100%. And this is awesome. This is why it's such a great time to invest. Yeah.
yeah, my last thing, before we conclude the
Yeah.
podcast is, so there's a saying that software has already been eaten. So what are the new frontiers of value creation? Obviously, you discussed about AI and existing sectors that are waiting for disruption. And the second thing which has been common, discussed is this the year of agents or decade of agents?
Yeah. I can start and Prateek, you can say.
Sure.
Yeah. I won't talk about agents. Everybody talks about agents, but I'll talk about an area that I'm very, very interested in. It really is about the intersection of the physical world and AI, right? I think that if I take a look at a lot of like the tailwinds provided by, you can talk about foundation models, but also obviously like vision language models, kind of like perception planning and so on. I feel as though like a lot of like the core capabilities required to actually have either small scale or full humanoid robots deployed in either homes or kind of like manufacturing settings, it's really starting to come into focus, right? We have done a number of like I would say investments in kind of like that robotics, drones, foundation models for the real world, physical sciences, and AI that I'm very excited about. In some way, it's an extension of AI, right? Like if AI is able to now kind of go from pure digital domains to kind of like physical domains as well, I think the world could be very, very interesting. Now, does that happen in 1 year or a decade, much like your agent's question? I don't know. But you know what the cool thing about being an early stage investor is like you have a decade, to kind of like your companies to kind of grow up. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll answer this a slightly different way because I think as people who've been reading science fiction for a while, I think a bunch of those things are coming alive now. I remember reading 2001 Space Odyssey, and that's a different kind of a book, but I often wondered, what 2001 is gone. It's been about 20 years since then, but many of those things have never materialized, right? But you know what? A bunch of those things seem to be unfolding right in front of our eyes right now. And all great science fiction it just opens up what are the multiple things that possibly going to happen, right? And I would say today, anybody who's building or investing should possibly go back to some of those books to inspire them from the first place. Yeah?
So glad you said that. I mean, perhaps if I'll add one more thing before we finish here, all of us, founders, SPC members, investors, executives, it's very easy to get lost in the game. Like there's, kind of like how do we start, build, scale, invest in companies? Every time I find myself going too deep into the game, I take myself like pause for a second and remind myself we live in a magical time. Like we live in an insane time of capabilities. How you think of them as computers, but these are actually just like core things that humans want to do to build interesting things, to interact with each other, to communicate. We live in a magical time right now, right? And it's just a magical time to be alive. And I think it's important to kind of remind myself of that anytime I get super deep into just like the investing game, because I feel really fortunate and kind of like privileged to be here, not just in SPC overall, but especially here in Bangalore. Like, what a great time to be alive, like to be able to build things.
And I firmly believe, right? Like SF Bay Area has shown that infinite value creation is possible with companies like OpenAI, Anthropic reaching like $500 billion market cap, and right. So I think similar trend would start happening in India in some period of time.
Sure.
We don't know when.
Firm belief. Yes.
Completely. It's not an if at all. It's just a question of when.
So thank you so much, Aditya and Prateek. It's been amazing, recording this podcast with you, learning from you, and enjoyed this conversation thoroughly.
Same here.
Same. I learned a lot from our conversation. Thank you for taking the time.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.